I woke up to find orange flags in my yard, but no one told me why they were there. At first, I thought it was some utility company marking a line. Gas, maybe, water, something boring, something normal. But by the afternoon, a white truck rolled up. It didn't have a company logo, just a magnetic sign on the side that said Ridge HOA. The man who stepped out didn't knock. He walked around my property like he already owned it, clipboard in hand, talking into his walkie like he was on some kind of mission. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I stepped outside, keeping calm. I've learned over the years when people come for what's yours, they do it quietly until you stand in their way. "Can I help you?" I asked. He barely looked at me. "Just surveying, standard procedure, you'll be getting a notice." Then he was back in his truck, gone in seconds. No card, no name, just dust on my gravel driveway and orange flags in the dirt. But the real notice came 3 days later. Folded in a plain envelope, stuffed in my mailbox, no stamp, no return address. It read, "This letter serves as formal notification that the dock located behind your home is in violation of community guidelines established by the Ridge HOA. All unauthorized structures must be removed within 30 days or be subject to enforcement." I stood there gripping the letter, my hands trembling, not from fear, from disbelief. I'd built that dock with my father 22 years ago. Before there was an HOA. Before there were gates, board members, or community newsletters filled with passive-aggressive smiley faces. Back then it was just me, him, and the water. My dad used to say, "This land will outlive us. Take care of it like it's your own blood." So I did. I kept the dock maintained. I fixed the railings every spring. I let neighborhood kids fish off it in the summers. Never once had anyone complained. Until now. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The HOA, they weren't just mistaken. They were trespassing on land they didn't even own. And soon, they'd regret waking up a man who knew exactly what that land meant, and exactly how far back its boundaries really went. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the edge of the dock, staring out over the water. The moonlight flickered across the surface, quiet and silver, and all I could hear were my father's boots on these old planks, like a ghost walking beside me. I whispered into the dark, "They think they can take this." But something in me answered, "Then show them why they can't." The next morning, I pulled out a file I hadn't touched in years. Deed records, survey maps, handwritten notes from my father. He'd been meticulous. I flipped through yellowing pages until I found the one thing that made my breath catch in my throat. A certified land plat, dated 1974. It showed a clear line drawn in ink. And behind that line, the dock. My dock. On private property. Not HOA land. But there was something else. Another map, another boundary line. I traced it with my finger slowly, reading the fine print. And that's when I found it. A clause, a quiet, powerful detail, buried in legal language like a diamond in the dirt. The Waterway wasn't under the HOA's control. It never had been. It belonged to a legacy land trust, a trust my father had helped form, with ownership rights passed directly to his heirs. Which meant one thing. Not only did I own my dock, I owned the water under every dock in the entire community. But I wasn't ready to say it yet. Not out loud. Because the truth doesn't always speak for itself. Sometimes you have to let people walk straight into it. So when the HOA came back the next week, clipboards ready, contractor trucks idling, I didn't stop them. I watched. And I waited. Because the moment they set foot on my dock with a demolition order in hand, they'd be stepping onto land they had no right to touch. And I was ready. He stepped onto my dock like it was already his. Clipboard, vest, sunglasses too dark for the cloudy day. He didn't knock, didn't speak. Just motioned to the two workers behind him, both wearing matching neon shirts with a local contracting logo. One carried a crowbar, the other had a saw. From my porch, I watched them approach the dock like executioners arriving at a funeral they weren't invited to. Still, I said nothing. Let them walk into it. The man with the clipboard knelt, looking at the dock supports like he was inspecting a termite infestation. "You boys start with the outer boards," he said, loud enough for me to hear. "Excuse me," I finally called, my voice calm. He turned annoyed. "You were," he said, like he'd rehearsed that line in front of a mirror. "I was," I replied, "but you were." He raised an eyebrow. "We're well within the HOA's rights, structures unapproved, non-standard, and—" "It's not within HOA jurisdiction," I said. "This dock was built before Ridge was even named, and this water," I pointed beyond the posts, "it isn't yours." The workers paused. One looked uncertain. The other stared at the man with the clipboard, waiting for orders. "Sir, with all due respect," he began. But I was already walking down the steps. File folder in hand. I laid it gently on the dock between us, between him and the history he was about to destroy. "This is the original land plat, county stamped, 1974, this dock, private property." He didn't look. So I pulled out the second document, the one that really mattered. "This," I said, holding it up, "is a certified legacy trust. I inherited this land, and with it the Waterway." That got his attention. He stepped forward, snatched the paper from my hand like it would dissolve if he didn't move fast enough. His eyes scanned it, but I could see the moment he realized he didn't know what he was reading. So I helped him. 37 years ago, I said, my father and 2 others secured the rights to maintain and protect the entire watershed. That includes every inch of this lake, its banks and its inlets. I paused, and every dock built on it. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because when you build your authority on assumptions, truth feels like a sucker punch. Behind him, one of the workers stepped back from the dock. The other muttered, "We're not getting paid enough for this." I could smiled, but I didn't. Not yet. Because then came the words I'd been waiting for. "We'll have to bring this to the board," the man said, his voice suddenly unsure. "I already did," I said. His head jerked up. "What?" "Last week," I told him. "I sent every member of the HOA board a certified copy of this trust and a letter from my attorney." I watched the realization settle into his bones like winter. "Which means," I continued, "if you take one more step toward this dock, you're not just trespassing, you're interfering with a protected trust. That's a felony." He stood frozen, weighing something behind his eyes. His pride, maybe, or fear. Then he turned, snatched the clipboard from the dock, motioned to his crew. "Let's go," he said. And just like that, they left. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. Because people like him don't lose quietly. And the HOA. They weren't finished. Not by a long shot. That night I stood on the dock again, alone, except for the sound of water and the hum of crickets. My hand rested on the railing my father built. My breath slowed. And still I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I found the letter taped to my front door. Plain white, bold font. "Due to recent developments, your status as a resident will be reviewed at the next HOA compliance hearing. Attendance required." There was no signature. No date. Just the warning. They were coming after me another way now, not through the dock. Through paperwork, hearings, technicalities. But they'd made one mistake. They came for the land without knowing its history. Now they were coming for the man who owned it, without realizing the one thing he'd learned from it. Storms don't scare the mountain. They called me to a meeting I never wanted to attend. The kind of meeting where every eye feels like it's judging you, waiting for you to slip. I stood outside the HOA clubhouse that evening, cold sweat on my palms, heart pounding like it was trying to break free. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a target. Neighbors I'd said hello to for years now looked through me like I was a stranger. Some even whispered as I passed. Why is he fighting the HOA? Doesn't he want to be part of the community? But what they didn't know, what nobody did, was that this wasn't just about a dock or some neighborhood rules. It was about something deeper, something that touched the core of who I was. Because this was my legacy, my father's promise, and the water, the lifeblood of this place, was tied to my family's name. I walked into the room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The board members sat behind a long table, faces tight and unreadable. The president, a man named Mr. Caldwell, glanced up from his notes and gave me a nod that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's get started," he said. What followed was a blur. Pages of HOA regulations, objections about safety and unauthorized structures, demands to remove the dock within 14 days. They played their part well, reading from scripts polished over years of HOA meetings. But I was ready. When they asked about proof of ownership, I pulled out the documents, placing them on the table like a challenge. "Here," I said, "this land and the waterways belong to me. This dock is my family." Some members shifted uncomfortably. One woman whispered to another. But the president kept his composure. "Mr. Harper," he said, "we respect your position, but the HOA has bylaws that apply to all residents equally. Exceptions can't be made based on family history or old deeds." I felt a knot tightening in my chest. Old deeds, family history. Was that how they saw it? Like it was just a story? Because it was. It was real. It was binding. I looked around the room. Faces staring back, some skeptical, some indifferent. And I realized how alone I had become. The fight was no longer just about water or docks. It was about respect, ownership, and the power to protect what's yours, even when the world tries to take it. "Do you have anything else to add?" Caldwell asked, voice sharper now. I took a breath. "Sometimes," I said slowly, "the strongest people are the ones who stay silent the longest." The room went quiet. No one said a word. But I could feel their eyes burning into me like a challenge. Because they didn't understand. They never would. Not yet. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside. The cool air hit my face. I watched the sun dip behind the trees, painting the sky in oranges and purples. I felt the weight of every look, every whispered doubt. But something inside me stirred. A determination. Because this wasn't just a fight for a dock. It was a fight for identity, for dignity, for the right to be heard. I remembered my father's words. Dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. I clenched my fists. Whatever it took. I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. I sat alone in the dark, wondering if anyone remembered who I really was. The silence in that house was deafening. The ticking clock on the wall sounded like a countdown. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with ordinary life. Kids laughing, sprinklers spraying, dogs barking. But inside, I was trapped in a storm of doubt and loneliness. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Even the mail carrier seemed hesitant when handing me letters. Letters like the one I found that morning slipped under my door. Final notice: failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in legal action. Legal action. The words echoed through my mind. I thought of the years spent building a life here. Of fishing at dawn with my dad. Of summer nights on this dock, watching fireflies dance over the water. Could they really take that from me? Could they erase a legacy like it was just some inconvenient fact? I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to the memories. But the truth was harder than I expected. Because standing up to a system isn't just about facts or papers. It's about people, and people don't always fight fair. The HOA board had the power of community votes, lawyers, and money. I had a worn-out deed and a stubborn heart. But that heart was enough. Because I knew something they didn't. That land isn't just lines on a map. It's memory. It's love. It's history. And no contract could ever fully erase that. That night I reached out. To old friends. To people who'd known my family. I sent emails, made calls. I asked for help. I told them the truth. Not just about the dock, but about what it meant. The response was slow at first. But then, like ripples spreading across a still pond, voices started to come back. Neighbors who remembered my father's kindness. People who had fished off my dock as kids. Families who wanted to see justice done. I wasn't alone anymore. Not really. But the fight was far from over. Because the HOA wasn't backing down. They sent their attorney next. A sharp-suited woman named Ms. Pierce. She came to the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She handed me a thick packet of papers. "Your compliance hearing is scheduled," she said. "Prepare accordingly." I took the papers, feeling their weight. Contracts, legal jargon, deadlines. All designed to wear me down. But I wasn't afraid. Not yet. Because sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who keep standing. Even when the world tries to push them down. And I was ready. To fight. To protect. To prove that some things, like family, land, and dignity, aren't negotiable. I stared at the papers on my kitchen table and felt the walls closing in. It was like the whole world was pressing down on me. Pages filled with legalese, deadlines, and demands I barely understood. The HOA's attorney wasn't just coming for my dock anymore. She was coming for my history, my rights, my very identity. I remembered my father's face, weathered hands, steady eyes, a man who never backed down. And suddenly, I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. I was fighting for everything he stood for. I reached out to a lawyer I barely knew, a local who had helped a few neighbors with minor disputes. He agreed to look over the documents. When he called back, his voice was cautious but hopeful. "This isn't your average HOA complaint," he said. "You have something solid here, the trust, the deed, it's strong." But then he warned me, "They're going to drag this out. Wear you down, you need to be ready." Ready. That word echoed in my mind. Because readiness wasn't just about legal defenses. It was about strength. Mental, emotional, physical. I had to prepare. So I started going back to the dock every morning before dawn. Just me and the water. I let the silence wash over me. The cool mist on my face reminded me why this fight mattered. Why this wasn't just about property lines or HOA rules. It was about belonging. About home. One morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, I saw a family setting up near the lake. Two kids chasing each other, laughter filling the air. Their mother waved at me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't just fighting alone. Maybe this was bigger than me. Bigger than the HOA. Because some things are worth standing for. Some things are worth fighting through the fear and the doubt. Because dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. And I was ready to sacrifice. No matter what came next. Every knock on the door felt like a countdown. Weeks passed, the days blurred into one long stretch of waiting. The letters, the whispers, the sideways glances, they all piled up like storm clouds on a horizon I couldn't escape. Every morning I'd wake before dawn, walk to the dock, and watch the water ripple beneath the rising sun. The lake held my memories, my father's stories, the hope I needed. But inside, the weight was heavier than ever. Neighbors I once called friends crossed the street to avoid me. Conversations stopped when I approached. The community I'd been part of felt like a stranger's town. One evening, I found a note slipped under my door. No signature. Just 3 words. Give it up. That message wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. I folded the note carefully and tucked it away. I didn't give up. I wouldn't. Because what the HOA didn't understand was that this fight wasn't just about land. It was about legacy. About truth. About standing for what's right when no one else will. The night before the hearing, I sat on the dock, staring into the dark water. I thought of my father's hands, strong, steady, patient. Of the lessons he taught me. Of the quiet dignity in standing firm, even when you're alone. I whispered into the night, I'm ready. The next day, I walked into that room. Not just as a man defending a dock, but as a son honoring his father. As a guardian of something bigger than rules or bylaws. The board members were there. Their faces unreadable. Ms. Pierce sat at the edge, clipboard ready. But I wasn't intimidated. I spoke clearly, calmly. With every word, I laid down the truth. The trust, the deed, the history, the community's forgotten roots. At first, they resisted. They challenged me on details, on jurisdiction. But as the hearing went on, I could see cracks. Doubt flickered in their eyes. And for the first time, I felt the tide turn. Because sometimes, the strongest people aren't the loudest. They're the ones who keep standing. Even when the world expects them to fall. When the room finally fell silent, I realized this was bigger than me. The hearing stretched on longer than I expected. Voices rose, papers shuffled, arguments volleyed back and forth. But beneath it all, I could feel a shift. Not just in the room, but inside me. I wasn't just fighting for a dock anymore. I was fighting for respect. For acknowledgement. For the truth to be seen. Ms. Pierce's sharp gaze softened just a bit as I spoke about my father's trust, about the rights handed down like a torch through generations. One board member leaned forward, his skepticism fatting into curiosity. When I finished, I looked around the room. Faces that had been hard and cold now showed cracks of understanding. But then came the question I dreaded. Mr. Harper, Caldwell said, voice calm but firm, what happens if this ruling sets a precedent? What if other residents claim similar rights? How do we manage the community then? The room held its breath. I thought about that. About the future. About the balance between community rules and individual rights. And I knew the answer wasn't simple. But I spoke anyway. Communities aren't just about rules, I said. They're about trust, respect, and understanding. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is listen, really listen, to the stories that built this place. A pause. Then slowly, the board began to nod. The decision wasn't immediate. Weeks passed. Calls came. Meetings held behind closed doors. But one afternoon, I got the call. The HOA was withdrawing their enforcement. The dock would stay. The waterway rights respected. And for the first time in months, relief washed over me like the morning sun on the lake. But even in victory, I felt the weight of what it took. The nights of loneliness. The whispers. The doubt. I realized that sometimes, standing for what's right means walking through the hardest parts alone. But it also means paving the way for those who come after. As I walked back to the dock that evening, the water calm and shimmering, I felt my father's presence. A quiet pride. a gentle strength. And I knew this fight was never just about property lines. It was about the kind of courage that lives in the hearts of those who refuse to be forgotten.